Dear students, welcome to Sri Chaitanya chapter at a glance. Today's topic is ecosystem. So ecosystem also carries a very important role in NEET exam because it carries on an average 2 to 3 questions in every year of NEET exam. So let us start this concept. Here it is. Within this 1 hour of time, let us complete all the areas of ecosystem without any ambiguities and without any doubts regarding this chapter. Let us understand the chapter history in previous NEET exam. In NEET 2025, they gave 3 questions, 24, 3 questions, and next re-NEET exam in 2024 also they gave 3 questions. So in 2023 only 2 questions, on an average 2 to 3 questions will rise from this chapter. That's why it is very important for NEET exam in biology. Next, let us understand some of the important questions and some of the questions gave in the previous NEET. So here in 2025 questions, 3 questions are there, and in that part you need to know the primary source of energy in ecosystem is solar energy, statement 1. That statement 2, the rate of production of organic matter photosynthesis in ecosystem is called net primary productivity. Then you can find the point here. It is the second statement is should be gross primary productivity, not net primary productivity. That's why it is not the correct statement. Second one is not correct statement. First statement is correct. In the second next point is question number 3. So some of the question is not question number 3 exactly, it is question given below the 2 important statements. Statement 1, ecosystem, there is a unidirectional flow of energy of the sun from the producers to consumers. It is the correct statement. And the second statement is ecosystem is exempted from the second law of thermodynamics. It is wrong statement because thermodynamics, both laws can be applicable for the ecosystem. Next, here it is ecology based question. It is, that is, who is the father of ecology in India? That is Ramdev Mishra. And next one is, which of the following is the unit for productivity of ecosystem? Here most of the students are making mistakes. The productivity is different from the production component. Primary production can be valued in the form of kilocalories per meter square, but here productivity means is the rate. That means kilocalories per meter square per year is the correct answer regarding this. Next one is in 2024 PYQ questions. There you can find here the matching gave in this part, that is tertiary consumer, secondary consumer, primary producer. So among these, here it is grass will be the primary producer, and next goat will be the primary consumer, and wolf will be the secondary consumer, lion will be the tertiary consumer. That you can understand easily by observing that. But in this question there is some difficulty pattern you need to understand. Here in the ecosystem, the net primary productivity of the first trophic level is 100x. Then what would be the GPP of the third tropical level? So GPP of the third tropical level means what you need to understand. GPP is the energy available for itself. NPP means it is available for the next. That's why here it is the GPP we have to consider the value from the 100x which is in the NPP, which can be the NPP as it is consumed by the primary consumer, and primary consumer can retains only 10x. The 10x can be available for the secondary consumer. In that cases, secondary consumer means that is third tropical level. 10x can be available for that. In that 10x, if the question is what is NPP of the tertiary tropical level, it will be the 1x. But here the answer is 10x in this part. Then next one is given below the 2 statements regarding ecosystem. The rate of decomposition is not related to chemical composition of detritus and climatic factors. So in this condition, it is definitely related to chemical composition, and the statement 2, in a particular climatic conditions, decomposition rate is faster detritus enriched with the lignin and actin. Lignin and actin can reduce the decomposition speed, that we know. That's why both statements are false. Next, in 2024 re-NEET exam, the questions you need to understand the following are not limitations of ecological pyramids. Here, not limitation of ecological pyramids is it accommodates the food web. It is a wrong statement. Actually, this one do not accommodate food web. It is explaining food pyramids are explaining only food chains, not food web. Food chains are almost never possible to exist. That is a statement in NCERT. Next point is consider the pyramid of energy in ecosystem given below. If the T4 is about 1000 joules, it will be 10,000, it will be 1 lakh, and it will be 10 lakhs. The answer will be the 10 lakhs, that is the answer D. Then in the case of what is the NCERT about an ecosystem, here it is, it can be vary from the small sized pond to the large sized pond. There is a direct NCERT line. It may be anthropogenic in origin. It is anthropogenic origin. Some ecosystems can be created by the human. It may be temporary, permanent. So some are temporary, some are permanent. It also can be possible. It involves in the function of the flow of energy, but not in the recycling of nutrients. But every ecosystem can recycle the nutrients, then only it can be considered as an ecosystem. That's why answer will be D. Next one is in 2023 questions. There are two questions from this part. Here the detritus perform fragmentation. The humus is further degraded by some microbes during the mineralization. Water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil and get precipitated by the process called leaching. The detritus food chain begins with living organisms. Here it is, the E statement is earthworms break down detritus into smaller particles by approaches called catabolism. So among these you need to consider the D statement is the detritus food chain begins with dead matter. That's why it is wrong. Next, earthworms break down the detritus into smaller particles. The process is known as fragmentation. So it is wrong one. Next, the second question is the equation of GPP minus R is equal to NPP. In this, R is equal to respiration. So here respiration loss is known as R. GPP minus respiration loss is equal to NPP. Then let us make summarization of all the ecosystem in one flowchart explains the core concept. While in that part ecosystem, this ecosystem having important areas we need to cover for the understanding. One is structure and function. Ecosystem structure is consisting structural components and functional components are there. Those are biotic, abiotic components. Functional components are productivity, decomposition, energy flow and nutrient cycling. Then in the case of productivity, again it is primary productivity, secondary productivity. Primary productivity again gross primary productivity, net primary productivity. Then the secondary productivity is conversion of primary productivity to secondary productivity by consumers. Then the annual net primary productivity mentioned 170 billion tons in all over the biosphere, and oceans occupied and contribution is 55 billion tons and terrestrial is about 115 billion tons. Next, decomposition is also important area where we need to understand the fragmentation, leaching, catabolism all together works a simultaneous time in the decomposition. Then next one is humidification, mineralization. These are the further step finally decomposition process. While in that cases decomposition can be increases by rich nitrogen, sugar, warm temperature and aerobic condition. Decomposition unfavorable conditions are very cold, very hot and lignin chitin presence, absence of microorganisms and anaerobic conditions can be reduce the decomposition rate. Then next one is the ecosystem. Another important subtopic is energy flow. This energy flow explains about the sunlight which is falling on earth, which can be reflect back majority version and some of the components can be available for the plant known as PAR. Then some energy can convert into GPP, GPP to NPP, NPP to primary consumer, secondary consumer and tertiary consumers. In addition to that, energy flow can be observed with the food chains and food web explanation is also very important for this part. Next, ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids are, it is geometrical representation about the different tropical levels in a systematic arrangement. The base is explaining about the producers and next one is primary consumers, secondary consumers and tertiary consumers all together can be applicable. So while in that cases they are different either upright or inverted or some of the different modes are there. We need to understand this part. That's why you need to understand, just observe this image once where it explains about the all composites at one place in ecosystem in this flowchart. Okay, so ecosystem topic, let us understand this concept of ecosystem. This ecosystem chapter 12 in NCERT. Let us understand one by one. The ecosystem will be considered as a functional unit of nature. Functional unit of nature. So here this ecosystem is consisting all the components like physical and chemical components all together existing in as an individual system. Now let us observe the important points regarding the entire biosphere will be considered as global ecosystem. Global ecosystem means all together Earth can be considered as one big ecosystem. That one big ecosystem understanding is very important. For the understanding of this big ecosystem, we categorize the entire ecosystem into simple parts, that is two basic categories known as terrestrial and aquatic. So terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. In that case of terrestrial ecosystems, forest, grassland, desert and some of the examples in case of terrestrial. And aquatic ecosystem, pond, lake, wetland, river, estuary and sea can be act as aquatic ecosystem. Then man-made ecosystems are also there known as crop field. Crop field having very less diversity but productivity is very high in case of man-made ecosystem, that is crop fields. Next point here it is the ecosystem input and outputs. If you consider the ecosystem is a component, that ecosystem is consisting input, output and energy transfer. Input will be considered as productivity and output will be considered as degradation and decomposition, energy loss, and middle one is transfer of energy, that is movement of energy from one tropical level to another tropical level. That is the basic point. And the next thing is ecosystem structure and function. How to understand this ecosystem structure and function? So in this connection, what we need to understand, here the ecosystem having both structural and functional components. Here it is, the ecosystem is consisting structural components and functional components. Structural components of ecosystem are known as, here it is, biotic factors and abiotic factors. Biotic and abiotic factors are structural components of ecosystem. Functional components of ecosystem, those are productivity, decomposition, energy flow and next one is nutrient cycling are the important functional components of ecosystem. Now in this connection you need to know, to understand one ecosystem you must know what are the biological and abiological biotic factors all together involving for this. And moreover, in one ecosystem the vertical distribution of different species occupying at different levels will be considered as stratification. For example, if you find one forest is consisting different types of the plants, like some plants are taller and very bigger in size, some are shorter and some are shrubs and some are the very flat in this area. This arrangement of the vertical distribution of the plant will be considered as, not only plants, majority of the living forms we can apply for this, but in the plants you can apply easy example for understanding way. That's why here the vertical distribution of different species occupying the different levels is called stratification, is one of the important statement that we need to understand. Then next point is the functional components of the ecosystem that you need to know. Those are productivity, decomposition, energy flow and nutrient cycling are the important facts for this concern. And moreover, here you need to know for understanding this productivity, decomposition, energy flow and functional components of ecosystem, we need to know about the one typical ecosystem that is known as lake ecosystem or pond ecosystem. Let us understand the pond ecosystem for a brief observation of all together. Here they mention one point, pond as an example, a fairly self-sustainable unit and rather simple example that explains even the complex interaction that exists in aquatic ecosystem. So pond ecosystem explains in all way means of total ecosystem and its structure arrangement. The complex structure functions also can be understood by using this pond ecosystem. Now let us understand this way. Here it is. The pond ecosystem is consisting important components. Here it is. If you consider it is a lake ecosystem, from the sunlight can be applicable on this. The sunlight fall, which is abiotic factors you can find. What are the abiotic factors here? That is sunlight means sun rays, photosynthesis can be applicable here, temperature, light and water, soil, pressure. These are all under categories of abiotic components. What are the biotic components? Biotic components you can apply as some of the producers, consumers and decomposers. Producers, consumers and decomposers. Here, these are the phytoplanktons you can take. Those are the producers. Not only phytoplankton, some plants here and floating plants and submerged plants all together under the producers. So, next one is consumers. Primary consumers, secondary consumers are continuously present. Here, zooplanktons can be considered as secondary consumers and small fishes, next consumers and final consumers. After the organism death, the bottom organisms like some of the saprophytic organisms can be under category of decomposers. These are all producers, consumers and decomposers. That's why you need to understand all the system requirement of the one ecosystem understanding levels are present within one lake ecosystem. That's why you can find the point. The abiotic components are, these are water, dissolved inorganic components and rich soil deposits, and at the bottom of point plus soil, solar input and temperature maintenance, day length light and other climatic conditions can regulate the content, that is known as abiotic components. And the autotrophs means the producers you can find phytoplanktons, next floating, submerged and marginal plants found in edges. They are all under category of autotrophs. Next consumers you can find, those are zooplanktons, free swimming and bottom dwelling organisms of farms. Next decomposers are fungi, bacteria, flagellates, especially at abundant in the bottom of the pond, all together under decomposers. So here all organisms are involving in the different levels of their adaptation. Next here it is, the decomposers are doing the point conversion of organic matter into inorganic matter, but the producers are doing conversion of inorganic matter into organic matter. So in that cases, the conversion of inorganic to organic material with the help of the radiant energy of the sun by the autotrophs. Okay, so here consumption of the autotrophs by the heterotrophs, decomposition and mineralization is dead matter released by the back to the reuse of organisms, that is known as recycling of the nutritions. That is important point. Then after this, let us understand the next point known as productivity. Productivity means here if you take any ecosystem, we must understand the ecosystem comfortability or adjustment with the sense of its quantity of increasing, that is in the form of biomass. So here a constant input of solar energy is a basic requirement for any ecosystem to maintain the functional and the sustainability. Then the primary production is defined as amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during the photosynthesis process. So by the photosynthesis, amount of biomass increased by producers, that is known as a productivity. Then the productivity can be measured here, just you need to understand. Here productivity can be measured, production measures in grams per meter square. But here it is productivity, it is a rate. Productivity means rate. This one can be explained as grams per meter square per year. Grams per meter square per year. That is productivity is considered as a rate of biomass increase. Okay, then next one is the productivity can be measured in the form of kilocalories per meter square per year or grams per meter square per year. That is the measurement way, you need to know that. Then next point here it is the gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Whenever the plants producing some amount of energy from the sun rays or from the solar energy, the amount of energy acquired by the plant to hold by itself, that is known as GPP, that is gross primary productivity. So for that concern, you need to know gross primary productivity means an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during the photosynthesis. Primary productivity looks like the same as gross primary productivity, but it is primary productivity is a broad word, and gross primary productivity by photosynthesis, the ecosystem rate of photosynthesis process, the ecosystem acquires the gross amount of energy by the plants, that is GPP. See here it is GPP, primary productivity can be differentiated into GPP and NPP. GPP means plants acquired energy and NPP means after consumption of energy by the plants, the remaining energy available in plants known as NPP. For example, this is one plant, the energy acquired from the sun rays, it acquires GPP. From the GPP, it reuses some amount of energy known as R, that is known as respiration loss. After that, the remaining energy will be known as NPP. This NPP is available for the primary consumers. So, primary consumers can consume this GPP in the form of only NPP, because some of the energy from GPP consumed by the plants itself for the respiration, that is known as R, respiration loss. That is known as GPP and NPP. GPP minus R is equal to NPP. Then whenever this organism providing energy for the another organism, like any tiger or other organism, now this organism converting plant energy into animal energy, it is known as secondary productivity. Secondary productivity means it is defined as a rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. This is the consumer which converts plant matter into animal matter. That is known as secondary productivity. So, secondary productivity is always lesser with comparatively primary productivity. This is important point. Next one. Here is one statement about the assertion reason question. That is, the productivity of ecosystem varies in different types of ecosystem. The reason is the productivity depends on variety of environmental factors, availability of nutrients and photosynthetic capacity of the plants. All together will influence. That's why all ecosystems do not maintain constant productivity. That is one point. Next, the productivity levels, net primary productivity of all over the world means on entire earth how much amount of energy produced by year, that is known as biosphere net primary productivity. The net primary productivity is, here it is 170 billion tons per year annual production. Out of 170 billion tons, 55 billion tons from the oceans and remaining 115 billion tons from the land. Here that means out of 170, 32% of the 170 billion tons occupied producing by the oceans and 72% of 170 billions, they are 115 billions producing from the terrestrial or land. The reason behind, there is one question, even the land occupied majority portion by the oceans, still why it is not producing huge quantity of energy? The reason behind here it is, in case of ocean, photosynthetic area is lesser with the comparatively terrestrial area, because in the case of ocean, the depth region will not support for the photosynthesis, only surface area, and that too wherever the nutritional availability cycling is much possible, there only it can be takes place. That's why even the ocean occupied the larger area, they won't facilitate the larger primary production. That is the answer for that question. So let us understand the decomposition concept next. Decomposition means, here it is, conversion of organic matter into inorganic matter by the microorganisms or decomposers, and that inorganic components known as carbon dioxide, water, nutrients and other components. Finally, these decomposers are involving to convert dead matter which is utilizing for the another level of organisms. That is one point. And moreover, here it is, the dead plants remains such as leaves, bark, flowers and dead remains of the animals including fecal matter can be act as detritus. So detritus acting as raw material for the decomposition. The important steps in the process of decomposition are fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humidification and mineralization. But among these, this fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, all these three works at a simultaneous time, not one after another one. This is a very important point. And the next one is the humidification and mineralization. They can be progressed after the three steps of this. Next one is the detritus component can be degraded by the earthworms to break down the detritus into smaller particles known as fragmentation. Means larger complex matters fragment into small pieces known as fragmentation. Then leaching means soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon, get precipitated in unavailable salts. That is known as leaching. After that, the bacterial and fungal enzymes degrade this detritus into inorganic substances known as catabolism. So catabolism maintained by microorganisms and leaching is not involved with any microbial act, and here it is the fragmentation by the organism. So organisms not involving in which process of the decomposition means you can apply the leaching concept. Okay. Then next one is another important point, humidification. So here the humidification means it is a humus formation known as a humidification. During this process, what we need to understand, here it is, accumulation of dark colored amorphous substances called humus formation known as humidification. Here what we need to understand, humus formation is humidification, but the humus is a dark amorphous matter. Dark amorphous matter means it is not perfectly liquid, perfectly solid. That's why it is amorphous character, and it is having good quantity of the nutrients. That's why it is rich nutrient resources and highly resistant for the microbial action, and the decomposition rate will be very slow or extremely low. That represents the humus having number of different variants with the its characterization, because the humus is rich in nutrients, microbial action is very slow, but it is amorphous in nature and dark in color. Then the humus further degradation by the microorganisms known as mineralization. This mineralization is the end of the decomposition process. So here see the diagram. In this case, a plant grows on the soil, and whenever the plant gives the fall leaves on ground, these are, some are eaten by the insects and some are nutrients and energy into the food web, and some of the dispersion to the energy consumed by the microorganisms by the respiration way, some energy can be losses out. Then the saprophytic organisms are consuming this, it can convert into further decomposition. This will convert into rich organic matter, can be useful again for the plants. That's why recycling, for recycling, decomposition playing very vital role. Then next one is the decomposition condition. Decomposition can be enhances or decreases by the different factors. In some cases, decomposition can be increased or favorable condition for the decomposition and unfavorable condition for the decomposition. Let us understand favorable conditions of the decomposition. Those are warm condition and moist environment. Next, the aerobic conditions are important. Here it is warm temperature plus oxygen availability plus rich organic matter, and these are all important components for increasing, plus microbial resource. But decomposition rate can be decreased by different ways, that is very hot temperature or cold temperature plus anaerobic condition and presence of lignin, chitin like components can be reduce the decomposition rate. There you can find the climatic factors definitely influence the decomposition rate. Then decomposition rate is lower, it is rich with lignin, chitin and quicker and the point, and quicker it is having good quantity of water soluble nitrogenous waste materials. So these two are the important components. Decomposition can be decreased by, decomposition can be increased by. If there is decomposition favorability is much higher, the fast decomposition can convert rich organic matter turns into inorganic matter, which is facilitating for the plant's growth in an efficient way. Then next one is energy flow. In the case of energy flow, there you need to know the energy flow system, which explains about important points. Energy flow means energy moving from one to another tropical levels. For understanding this, except deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, remaining all are depending on sun only. So what is this exemption? This exemption means these organisms, they don't know awareness about the presence of sun even, because they are very deep in condition, the sunlight will not penetrate or reaches in that area. Then in this condition, what we need to understand, the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of the photosynthetically active radiation can be converted. For this, what you need to understand, let us observe the point here. That is, if it is sun, from the sun, the light is known as intrinsic radiation or incident radiation. This incident radiation about more than 50% can be reflected back, and it is less than 50% can be act as photosynthetic active radiation. This photosynthetic active radiation is available for the plants, but from this photosynthetic active radiation, these plants can utilize only 2 to 10% of PAR. Only 2 to 10% of PAR can be utilized by the plants. This will be turned into its GPP. So from this GPP, here the plants are consuming R, that we know. That means respiration. The remaining energy known as NPP, that is net primary productivity, available energy in plants for the herbivores, that is NPP. So here you need to know this concept, that is PAR, and 2 to 10% of PAR is the small amount which is available or enough for the entire system of the living world. The plants are the resources either directly or indirectly, definitely helping for the all other organisms in this part. So what we need to understand here, all organisms are dependent for their food on producers, either directly or indirectly. So flow of energy from the sun to producers and then to the consumers. This is giving the first law of thermodynamics. First law of thermodynamics means energy neither created or destroyed. Means all energy in every organism acquiring from the others. They are not creating their own energy. That is the point. And the next thing is here, the second law of thermodynamics also can be applicable for this part. This one given question in part in earlier point, they have given second law of thermodynamics exemption for the ecosystem. That is wrong statement. Now you can observe the point. This statement is having some deep meaning to understand. That is, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules they require to counteract the universal tendency towards the increasing disorderliness. For example, if you bring one animal to maintain the conserving, so but this organism requires continuous energy because inside its metabolic process is continuous, it requires energy to maintain its life. For that cases, you need to provide continuous food, otherwise it will die. Means even any organism, if it is not doing any work, still it requires energy to maintain its metabolic functions. So here every organism requires energy to maintain its metabolic function to construct its molecules. For that cases, they need energy from the earlier tropical level organisms. So here energy is required for every organism for every step. That's why energy can be continuously flows from one tropical level to another tropical level. So here another important point, the green plants in the ecosystem are called producers. Now let us understand the producers, primary, secondary and tertiary consumers and their. Then in terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. That is, in aquatic ecosystem, phytoplanktons and higher plants and green algae can be act as producers. Then in this concern, the producers are plants. They are involving for the initiation of any food chain except detritus food chain. Then next one is, there is another important statement here. No energy that is trapped in an organism remains constant. Every organism, if it acquires energy, it can pass to the next only. Next, the energy trapped in the producers, hence it is either passed into the consumers or to the detrivores. If a plant surviving with some amount of energy from the sunlight, it can be consumed by the herbivore or it will die and dissolves into the soil. So these two components can be definitely possible. Next, consumers. Consumers are also known as heterotrophs. So while in that cases, heterotrophs conditions, some of the common herbivores like insects, birds, mammals, terrestrial ecosystem, in terrestrial ecosystem, molluscs, aquatic ecosystems are important heterotrophs. Then next one is heterotrophs after carnivores. Carnivores means which are depending on herbivores, known as carnivores. Carnivores again can be considered as a primary carnivore, secondary carnivore and tertiary carnivores. Then based on this primary, secondary, tertiary carnivores, then we can place the system with the food chain, that is known as grazing food chain. Grazing food chain, there are different types of food chains available in nature known as grazing food chain, detritus food chain are very important food chains we need to understand now. Then next point here it is, grass is a producer, next goat is primary consumer and man can be secondary consumer, is a basic level of the grazing food chain. Next point is the detritus food chain. It starts with dead matter, it is very important, it starts with dead matter and here it is made up of decomposers which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrition requirements by degrading organic matter or detritus. Then next one is, this what is important, that is saprotrophs. They are decomposing components. Decomposer secretes digestive enzymes that break down the dead waste materials into simple inorganic materials which are subsequently absorbed by them. So here whenever the decomposer like bacteria releasing or working on decomposing matter, they are releasing some enzymes to dissolve them and absorbing into their body. And aquatic ecosystem, GFC is the major role playing component, that is, it is a major conduit for the energy flow. In terrestrial ecosystem, the larger fraction of energy can pass to the DFC than the GFC. Then detritus food chain may be connected with definitely some of the grazing food chain after certain levels, because in the detritus food chain, if it is starting with detritus matter to small maggots, maggots to small insects, insects by frogs and frogs consumed by snakes, then in that cases the detritus food chain connected to the grazing food chain, that you can apply for this area. Next one is some animals like cockroaches, cows and crows and other humans, like they are omnivores. They are not able to place in a particular range of the food chains, that's why they need to use food web for understanding this. Then here it is, the tropical level word is very important. Organisms occupy place in natural surroundings in a community according to the feeding relationship with other organisms based on their nutritional and food cases. The organisms occupy specific place known as tropical level. Means one tropical level means producers means all type of organisms which are converting solar energy turns into organic matter, the plant matter will be known as producers. Whatever it is, either phytoplanktons in a lake or the green plants or floating plants or offsets and all together can be considered as one tropical level, they like producers. Here you need to understand some of the first tropical level, second tropical level, third tropical level and fourth tropical levels. First tropical levels plants, herbivores, carnivores and top carnivores. First tropical level is known as the producers, second tropical level is the primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Examples: phytoplankton, zooplanktons, fishes, and man. Then grass, grasshopper, birds, and lion. And trees, cow, and wolf, and lion. These are the different type of the food chains you need to understand. And the next point here it is important points related to amount of energy transfer. So every organism in every tropical level depends on its lower tropical level. Then each tropical level has certain mass of living material at the particular time known as standing crop. Standing crop measures in the form of biomass. Biomass means it is the amount of organic matter or component increased for a particular time period. That is biomass increased with the dry weight is more accurate than the wet weight, because the water having no energy value. That's why the dry biomass is more accurate than that part. Then we can apply the 10% law application for this car. Energy flow. In case of energy flow, NPP energy can be available for the primary consumer. The primary consumer can pass that energy to the next consumer. By that way, every tropical level, the energy levels can be reduced to every 10% only can passes to the next. Because of this 10% law, the food chain tropical levels can be restricted. In case of the grazing food chain, the levels of the tropical levels can be restricted to 3 to 4 or 5, but not more than that, because the energy levels are greatly reduced for the tropical level by level. That is. Then, but in the case of detritus food chain, there is one specific point for the detritus food chain. Here it is. This is grazing food chain you can find here. From the plant to insects to birds to eagle or some of the final carnivore. But in the case of detritus food chain, this dead matter from the plant can be the dead matter to maintain the gain cycle, or from the insects dead matter can maintain the cycle, and for every time again new beginning of the detritus food chain will be takes place. That's why the detritus food chain is not same as grazing food chain, but detritus food chain limitations are there but not like GFC. GFC having very limitations because the food energy greatly loses from the tropical level to another tropical level. But detritus food chain, the loss of energy, initiation of energy also very less, but loss of energy can be greatly repeats again and again. Means one vulture dead matter also can be act as detritus to start again. That's why detritus food chain is different from the grazing food chain. Next, last point is about the ecological pyramids. So ecological pyramids means they are explaining about the geometrical relationship, means geometrical arrangement of the different tropical levels. Here you can find. Then the food energy relationship explains with the different tropical levels through the particular structure known as pyramids. The relationship expressed in the term of number, biomass and energy. In that cases, the base of the pyramid is explaining about the one tropical level, producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers and tertiary consumers. This type condition is explaining as food pyramids. There are three types of ecological pyramids are there, usually pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass and pyramid of energy. Let us observe one by one. Here it is, the pyramid of number. In grassland ecosystem, pyramid of number explains the producers are in millions, next primary consumers are in lakhs, and secondary consumers are very furtherly less, and tertiary consumers are in within the single digit. That means you can consider the producers are huge in number, the progressive number of the next tropical levels greatly decreases, that is food pyramid, that is grassland ecosystem explains this. Next one is about the pyramid of biomass. The pyramid of biomass explains the producers are huge in quantity in number, and primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Here the biomass, a forest with the number of the small organisms depending herbivores and primary consumers and secondary consumers. So that is, if you consider the weight of organisms, in the weight of organisms you can find the plants altogether weight 809 kgs for example, that is 37 kgs primary consumer, 11 kg secondary consumers, 1.5 kg tertiary consumers. Next one is this is very important point, that is pyramid of biomass inverted in case of the lake ecosystem, because phytoplanktons altogether weight is very less with comparatively zooplanktons. That's why the pyramid of biomass in lake ecosystem is inverted. This is important point. Next, another point is here, energy pyramid is always upright. The reason behind, the sunlight whatever available, about the 10 lakhs joules of sunlight is available, which one trapped by the producers about only 10,000, that is only 1% of the components. Here you need to understand one point as the energy of the intrinsic or incident radiation, in that part 50% is PAR, in that 2 to 10% are known as GPP, in that part NPP will be around GPP minus R is equal to NPP. Then NPP value will be considered as NPP is equal to 1% of IR. Here you can consider GPP also can be considered as 1% of IR, because GPP is 2 to 10% of PR, that means 1% of IR. So while in that cases they mention here one point, there is only 1% of the energy in sunlight is available into convert into NPP, that you can justify the statement here. Then next point is, any calculations of energy content biomass numbers had to include all the organisms at the tropical level. Means if you want to count the number of frogs in a particular grassland ecosystem, you should not consider 2 or 3 frogs. Altogether, that is a functional level who are depending on the primary consumers. Like if you consider frog as a carnivore, all the frogs and frog related organisms who are depending on the grasshoppers altogether can be considered as a one tropical level. That's why tropical level is a functional level, not the structural level. So in that part, next point, also given organism may occupy more than one tropical level simultaneously. One must remember that the tropical level represents a functional level, not a species as such. That is another important point. Next, a given species may occupy more than one tropical level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a sparrow can be primarily consumes when it eats seeds, but whenever it is considered as, if it eats insects, it will be considered as next consumer or secondary consumer. Then human can be the different tropical levels. Human can be the primary consumer or secondary consumer, tertiary consumer with the different types of food chains. Depending on if you consume the vegetate components, then will be considered as herbivorous. If they take goat, can be considered as primary carnivore. If they take other animals like birds, those are secondary carnivores. Then next one is, most of the ecosystems, all pyramids numbers of energy and biomass are upright. This is very important. Most of the pyramids are upright, but not all. Then producers are more in number in the biomass than the other organisms. That's why they are explaining the top number, means upright pyramids. But there are some exemptions. They mention one point here, one example, that is, if they take one tree ecosystem, one tree providing shelter for many insects. These insects are providing shelter for few birds. Then here you can consider less number of the trees, more number of the insects and less number of the birds. Now this pyramid will be considered as spindle pyramid or not upright pyramid. That's why you can find this point here. This is explaining that if you are count the number of insects feeding on a big tree, what kind of pyramid would you like? Now estimate the number of small birds depending on the insects. So in that cases, it is spindle shaped pyramid, you can apply for this. The pyramid of biomass in sea generally inverted because the biomass species far exceeds the phytoplankton. This is very important. Why it is considered as a paradox means, a small quantity of the phytoplankton can be useful for energy for the entire zooplankton. The reason behind here it is, phytoplankton's reproduction capacity is very huge and they will born and die immediately to produce huge amount of the energy trapping. That's why they can facilitate the growth of zooplanktons. And the next one is, pyramid of energy is always upright because Okay, it can never be inverted because always energy moving from the one unidirectional conditions. Pyramids, each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present in each tropical level in a given time. It is annually per unit area. Okay, then next point here it is. However, there are certain limitations in ecological pyramids. What are those? They does not take into account of the same species along with the 2 or more levels. That means, in case if it is omnivorous, omnivorous cannot fit in the ecological pyramids. That's why they are not giving importance for the omnivores as well as one of the important components known as saprophytic organisms. Saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids even though they are playing very important role. But they are not giving any importance. That's why ecological pyramids are having limitations for their explanation for understanding. Then some of the important point in this NCERT summary, but is not there in the total content because deleted syllabus topic is there in NCERT summary part in the new textbook. That is, you need to understand the storage and movement of the nutrient elements through the various components in the ecosystem is called nutrient cycling. There is a question can be possible from this part. Next one is nutrient cycling is two types, gaseous and sedimentary. Atmosphere or hydrosphere is the reservoir for the gaseous type of components like carbon, whereas earth crust is the reservoir for the sedimentary type, that is phosphorus like. Products of ecosystem process are named as ecosystem services, purification of air and water by forest. This is process and service of the ecosystem word. This is also very important. Then last you can find some of the important bits here. Plants are called as autotrophs because they fix carbon dioxide. In an ecosystem, dominated trees, the pyramid of numbers will be, in case of the dominated trees means the number of organisms increase in that part. There is some conflict you can find, inverted type pyramid and spindle type pyramid also can be possible for this. And the next thing is, in aquatic ecosystem, the limiting factors for the productivity is light because light cannot penetrate to the deeper. Next one is common detrivores in the lake ecosystem or in the detrivores in our ecosystem are earthworms. And the major reservoir of the carbon on earth is oceans. Next, which of the following has the largest population in a food chain? That is, decomposers are very huge in number because they are microbes in level. Next, the second trophic levels in lake is zooplanktons. Secondary producers are herbivores. And what is the percentage of photosynthetically active radiation PAR in incident solar radiation? Percentage of photosynthetically active radiation in incident solar radiation, that is lesser than 50. Here the answer should be changed here. What is the percentage of PAR in incident solar radiation? It is 50% or it is somewhat lesser than 50% is the correct answer as per that part. Then NPP for that is 1 to 5% case. Then, so this is not correct point. This is the B is the correct answer. For that case, do check that one. Next one is, so with that we can conclude the NCERT page line by line concept of the ecosystem. Dear students, let us observe some of the important bits regarding this ecosystem. Then let us make some of the few bits to understand the ecosystem of the topic. The rate of biomass production in consumers is known as secondary productivity. Then the correct statement about the flow of energy, the incorrect statement about the flow of energy is unidirectional correct, and flow from the lower to higher tropical level correct, and plant capture only 2 to 10% of PRI, it's also correct, but the energy trapped in organisms remains constant is incorrect. Next one is the given below are the two statements, one labeled as assertion reason. In that case, temperature is an important climatic factor that regulates the decomposition is correct one. And the next one is the temperature affects the metabolism of soil microbes during the decomposition. It is also correct and correct explanation. Next one is the sequence below the representation energy of the lake ecosystem. The GPP is 2600 kilocalories and R value is 25%. Then in the producer level, what is the energy available in the fish? So here, if GPP is 2600, then NPP will be, if R will be deleted, then NPP will be 1950. 1950. 1950 will be available in phytoplanktons for the zooplankton. So zooplankton take 1950 but zooplankton gives energy for the insects, that is 195. Then insects will take 195, insects will maintain 19.5 and fish will be take 19.5. In the fish availability is 1.95. This is the answer. Then next one is Euglena phytoplankton. Euglena is phytoplankton, mushroom is saprotroph, grasshopper is herbivore, earthworm is detrivore, frog is a carnivore. Next, which of the following correctly match with the given ecological pyramid? This pyramid is a big tree with insectivorous birds. Okay. Then next one is degradation of humus and release the minerals into the soil, extremely low process. This reason could be humus is highly resistant for the microorganism. That is the correct answer here. Next one is a lion feeds on cow. In which of the following can be applicable for that cow? So lion can be considered as it is a top carnivore and it is a third tropical level organism and it is secondary consumer, but it is not fourth tropical level because it is depending on cow, cow depends on grass, only third tropical level. And GFC is the major conduct energy flow of the aquatic ecosystem. No, it is a, yeah, it is correct one, sorry. So GFC is the major conduit for the energy flow of ecosystem, correct. Detritus food chain is do not operate in ocean. No, detritus operators there, but with comparison is GFC is much higher. That's why A is true, R is false. Then pesticide pollution in soil threat the decomposers. Then what happens if you eliminate the all decomposers? Here it can cause adverse effect on plant communities due to the lack of nutrient cycling. Then standing crop is measured more accurately by biomass per unit area. Which of the following set of ecological pyramids are similar in shape? Those are pyramid of biomass is inverted in lake ecosystem, but in the case of forest, pyramid of biomass is upright and pyramid of energy is always upright. And the next one is the process of fragmentation during decomposition maintained by earthworm. Next, pyramid of biomass inverted in ocean. Yes, that is true. And energy in phytoplanktons higher than the compared to the zooplanktons. Energy is not higher. Energy in phytoplanktons is higher than compared to the zooplankton. Its energy is higher, but it is not the biomass part. That's why both are true, but not correct explanation. Next, which of the following animals occupy more than one tropical levels means that is omnivorous like sparrow. Next, the energy available in the primary consumer level is higher than the secondary carnivore level. Greater than that of first of tropical level, primary consumer level available energy greater than the secondary carnivore level, that you can apply. Next, fragmentation, leaching and catabolism are some of the important steps you can find. Detrivores break down detritus into smaller particles will be considered as fragmentation. Water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon, get precipitated as unavailable salts, that is leaching. Second one, microsecrets enzymes degrade the detritus into simple organic components, that is catabolism. So answer will be 3. Choose the incorrect statement about the primary productivity. So here it depends on the plant species and their photosynthetic ability. Yes, it varies in the different ecosystem. Yes, NPP is the rate of formation of organic matter during the photosynthesis. No, it can be available for the next tropical level. The rate of dependence on availability of its rate depends on the availability of nutrients. That is also correct. So these are the important questions.